So is there anything you wanted to work on, in the short form? I think we had I can hear that little hissing there. Hear that little shh. So anything you want to work on that maybe the audience wants to, might be interested in? Yeah, so do that again. So do that again. So you did your first, the right side part, the horse's mane, and then you sit back. Yeah. So really, what? Yeah, because actually you usually have one side better than the other, mainly because one side might be something that you do more of, as like stepping through, or maybe that leg's a little adjusts a little bit better. But so when you're in this position and you turn and you sit back, so the important thing is when you shift your weight, that you get your knee over that toe when you pass through. So you build that stability. Now you turn the body a little bit, because when we're toeing out like this, and our hips are kind of flared out like this, so that's 45, this is kind of 45, so you have to turn into that direction to pass through center, and then that will, so you might be doing that on your left because you're used to moving the right foot. So it's sort of like if we're always doing this, right, on this side, and then when we do this on this side, it doesn't work as well, because believe it or not, your waist is used to turning in this direction, but it's not accustomed to turning. That's because it's not actually doing it enough to get programmed. So everything that you do over time, it starts to become better, because you're more aware of it and you're more sensitive to your position. So when we're stepping through, because this is one of those, we don't really have anything to connect with, so we have to step up and hold the ball before we do the diagonal flying or part the horse's mane. So when we shift, we have to go in this direction and then step out. Now we keep our foot straight and we just go through center. It's more direct. But because we have that little bit of a turnout in the front foot, your body has to track that. So that's where you're going to get that little bit of a, looks like a little bit of an arc. Yeah. So that's really, yeah. So that's really getting your lower body accustomed to the balance position. So like in brush knee, we step through. So in the long form, we actually have more stepping forward movements, because that's stepping through and turning and stepping through and turning. That's advancing forward. So you have retreat is retreating, is backing up. Advancing is moving forward. And when we move forward, what ends up happening is you're really, like grasp the sparrow's tail, you're moving forward. In this instance, we're here. Then we step up and we move forward. And we get into this forward lean position. So you're coordinating the hand movement so we can move up. You mean the shifting of weight? When we do 5 part the horse's manes. So when we do 5 part the horse's mane, first is the diagonal flying, right? Then we sit back and we sit here. We turn, and then we cycle through it, so we actually have to sit back and turn to create the 2. Now when we're here, we're doing the same thing. We have to find that position before we get to this position. And then it happens on this side because we're going back to that side. And then we end up like that. But if you're blending your hands, because we're here, as we shift and we connect the hand, because after all, what are we actually doing when we make that step forward? Especially, it's a movement. It's also building coordination and control. But ultimately, if you are using that motion, what you're doing is changing sides and intercepting to pull down. You see what I mean? So if you visualize this, if my hand is in a position like this, and something comes in, like I say, another arm comes into my space, I have to move around that point and then connect to that. So you can you see the line? So what you're doing is you're moving toward your opponent to create this movement. Now because I'm here, if I turn and I move like this, you track that center line, because that's where the arm is, or the opponent's limb is, when you're moving forward. So when you move in, you're doing that, because this is here, or I move like this, right? You see what's happening there is you're connecting with something that's coming into your space. So can you follow that? You see what that motion is? So that's why when we step up, if we were looking in this corner and we're stepping up, we would be like this. So when in the drills, we would stand here and strum the lute, right? But then there's not a lot of leg work. Now if I turn my body, we have this, right? So if you sort of look at that image, okay, we'll do it in the front here. When you look at this image, there's your center line. Here's my lower hand. If I turn my body, it's sort of in front of that shoulder, right? And then when I bring it past center and I turn it to here, it's sort of in front of that shoulder. So there's a space between here and here, here and here. How do you create the motion that gets you from the center line to here and to here? There's two ways, right? You can turn, or you can move your arm further, right? So one's the arm, sort of isolated, reaching. Other side is modifying your position by combining two actions. You have this action and you have this action. So I call that summation of components. Because if you consider this as one component and you consider this as one component, if you combine the two, you have a unit. A unit creates a movement. So a lot of times manipulation of skeletal structure is creating a motion or filling a space. How do you fill that space? You fill that space either by reaching, moving in a direction, or you move your body. And you're doing the same thing. You're filling that space or making space to avoid something that might be invading that space. So you're always it's adapting to the conditions. So when I move from here to here and I turn my body and step, now I created a forward movement by transitioning. I create a turning movement by turning my torso, and I reset my position by moving the other leg and still pass through center. So what I did was I filled this forward position and I filled this right-left space. So that's what you're doing, when you're moving in space, linking the movements, because you're creating a volume of movement, because movements are three-dimensional. If you have something flat, it's two-dimensional. it's really just an image. When you fill it with volume, now you have dimension, and now it has capacity, right? When you take a flat sheet, if it's square, and you then bring it out like that, now it has volume. It then has capacity. You could fill that with something. So it's a void. You're going to fill that void. So when we move and it has volume and space, then we have to fill that void. And what do you do when you fill that void? You have to do it with structure, mechanical sound movement, and linking it so that you can create that action. So that's what we're doing. When we're stepping forward, we're here. When we step forward, we're here. So when you have synchronization of your movement, it becomes that forward movement can turn into a crossing over. And you have J Lady Work Shuttle. When I turn here and I cross over, I have J Lady Work Shuttle. I change the movement in a direction, but essentially it's the same motion as this, right? So movements happen within the relative position of your space. Your space is here, and it's in front of you, and that's all we see if it's flat. But if we want to build some dimension, then we have this, then we have this corner, we have this corner. So really you have this 90-degree position. It's this, a pie. It's like a pie. You have a center, and this is the piece that you're dealing with. Now that piece is consistently traversing across the mapping of your form. So we're doing Jade Lady Work Shuttle. All we're doing from Path to Horse's Mane is changing that pie from here to here. So if I'm here and I change to here, I have a new center line, I have a new corner position, and I have a new target point. Then I move from here to here. Now I pass through to here. Now I have a new quadrant. I'm working with 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here, and then you go to the next position. So that's how we define the space. So that's really what we're doing when we do a mapped out form, because we're tracking, that routine as if it was road work, right? The mapping is really, how you divide up the pieces on the roads, the streets. You take a 90-degree turn or you take an angular turn, depends on. So when we're here, instead of having all these weird angles that becomes too much to figure out, we work with 0, 90, and 45 degrees, right? And what? Well, so that's how I teach it. A lot of people don't teach this way because they're not thinking along those lines, even though we have geometry of position. But it's the basic thing, the two corners and the front. But when you tie it in together, an octagon is 8 sides. And the octagon is that bagua shape that we talked about. And it's really a configuration that a lot of cultures use. The octagon is kind of that 8-sided thing that they use to represent things. But you take the corners out of the octagon, what do you have? A circle, right? So Tai Chi is circular, and then the bagua is angular with 8 sides. So a compass is the same thing. You have directions, so it's that same format. So when we stand in the middle, we have north, south, east, and west, and then we have the corners. And that's what a bagua is. So when we do our 4 corners, it's really, southwest, southeast, or northeast, northwest into those corners, and that's how we look at the form. So we start off, and back in the old days, they actually culturally they would use zodiac, and they use astrology to kind of name some of our postures. 7 stars, and some of these like beat the tiger. These are postures, but they also use some of these, even the sword forms. They have like the Big Dipper or something like that. They're using astrology to kind of label the name of the form or the posture. So, they use this mapping to show you which direction you're headed in. So, and then they used to say that, when you practice the form, you have to face, south, and then you turn to the east or the west. Because if you turn right or left, it's pretty confusing. Because where's right or left? The Three Stooges, I don't know if you saw that one, but when Mo would be on one side and Larry be on the other side, he says, okay, to your right, and they're facing each other. So they would hold a board and turn like this, and then they would be, so it's really relative, and you lose your bearings. It would just use left and right as a reference. But you can use left and right if you only have one front, right? If you only have one front, it's a relative position. But if you turn around and that's not your front, that's your back, and you say right or left, then it's backwards. Then there's a different image. So those are, that's what's confusing when we do streaming, because you're not always following from behind, which you have in the normal front, because that changes. So anyways, so that's what we have to do, is understand that this hand movement and this leg movement become a relationship. So that's when your hands and feet move together, right? So when we're shifting from neutral to part the horse's mane, we pass through center and then do that. So you would see what I just did was, after I did part the horse's mane, I sat back, and then I went like this. I went like this because I set up the next motion to get into here. So there's where the imbalance comes from, Nan. Sometimes when you step up and your arms are not moving, the relationship between the upper lower is in conflict, sort of. So if we just did this and just move the legs without moving the body, there's a disconnect. So what actually has to happen when you do part the horse mane is you have to sit back and you have to turn one way and then turn the other way, and then your hands and legs create a balance, you see. So the discrepancy comes from that. So not only do you have to shift your weight over that foot to find your center, your hands have to compensate for the change in center of mass. So the change in center of mass becomes an imbalance, and your body feels like it's not, it doesn't feel comfortable. Yeah. Yeah, so the idea of upper and lower coordination is when something happens below, something happens above. If something happens above, something happens below. So there's that cross-reference relationship. So when we're doing this, or we do this, or we're lifting the leg and the arm, there's something going on above, something below. You have a relationship, and then there's balance. But if you just go like this and not move the arm, then the body up above has to be stable or not tense or create any, sort of excessiveness above. So if you tense above and you're not stable, it's because the top became heavy. So if the top becomes heavy, you feel unstable. So you have to make the bottom heavy and then relax the top, and that gives you stability. So when we talk about balance and why people fall, right? It's because the top gets heavy. It gets heavy because you're tilting and you're looking forward, you're losing your posture, and you're not centered. So when you tip over like this, you're already top heavy, and you're leaning forward. So the tendency for a lot of people that are afraid to fall, afraid that they're gonna fall, is because they tend to look down. And when the sight line goes down, it draws you into that position, and that's why you would end up falling. But people with confidence and not really worried about that, and it's not really in their sort of in their stress stage where they're worried about it, and when you're worried about it, you're probably kind of tense because you have a defensive mechanism. But if you don't worry about it, you're pretty casual, you're pretty relaxed, you just go through the motions, and your body will adapt to whatever it is, and you can respond when you relax. You can't respond when you're tense, because there's one more moment that you have to relax before you can respond, that doesn't happen because you become tense and tenser. And then it becomes, sort of